Good afternoon, audience. And in today's cold afternoon, Delhi afternoon, we have somebody to warm up the ecosystem. From his insights, we have Ashwath. So Ashwath is here all the way from Bangalore, which is a warmer place. And we will talk about Ashwath shortly. Before we do that, can we start the session with a small interaction with the audience and with us very simple questions, and this is just to understand the distribution in the audience as to how many of us sitting here are from the technology side and how many are not. So if you could start off with a show of hand as to how many are from the technology side, are interested in technology, and then we will take the fireside chat ahead. So I am from technology, so I'll raise my hand. Okay, great. So out of the people who are from the technology side, how many of us are from the information security / QA side, and how many are not? So I'm not from the information security side, so I will not, put up my hand. How many of you are from the information security side? If not, how many of you are from the technology development side? Okay, so I think we have a 50-50 distribution, Ashwath. Before I go to Ashwath, I'll introduce him a bit. Ashwath is a avid speaker on information security. He's a deputy CISO from Razorpay. He has had a stint in renowned companies like Synopsys and Microsoft. His interests range from cloud security, from application security and threat modeling. And I think he has also spoken in technology conferences from SAP, Infosys and NetApp, etc. And one thing which I would like to highlight from his personal side is that he is a great table tennis player and has been a captain in his younger days. He loves spending time with his daughter. So, taking this further, I was reading one of the papers that today about 4,400 cyber attacks happen on the banking and the non-banking sector on a per daily basis. Now, Ashwath, if you could help us understand how do one navigate that challenge, and what would be the 3 business risks for fintechs which they should be aware of? Yeah, over to you.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Chandan, and good afternoon, everyone. I know it's a chilly morning, so thank you for spending time here instead of being at home or under a heater. So really appreciate that. And taking a step back, right? How many of you have heard of Razorpay or has used Razorpay? I think almost everyone, right? So anybody who's booked a ticket, anybody who's ordered food, variably or invariably you might have used Razorpay. So that puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, right? From especially me being from the security team, we want to kind of ensure, one, that your money is safe. So we want to ensure that there's absolutely no leakage of money either from the customer front or from the merchant front or for Razorpay, right? So that's the most important business risk. And number 2 is availability, right? So the reason why availability is one of the biggest business risks is, let's say you're at a shop, right? You're trying to purchase a particular item. Let's say if the website or the checkout does not work, that means the merchant who's trying to sell the item will not be able to get their money. And at the same time, me as a customer, I will not be able to purchase that particular item, right? Or I'll not be able to book a ticket. So that's the big responsibility for us. And the third last piece is we collect a lot of data, and data protection and securing the data is also very, very critical and important for us. So, those 3 are the main risks through which we derive a lot of the security risks and, ensure that we harden the environment enough so that we can cater to these 3 business risks.
Yeah, Ashwath, and I was speaking to one of my friends who's a CISO in a big firm, and he was telling me that perhaps now is the worst time to be a average CISO. I'm sure you're not average, you're above average, but an average CISO has a very difficult demands on his face, staring at his face.
Right.
So and that these demands would of course be coming from the risks which are there in the ecosystem. So how do one leverage threat intelligence and response to incidents? So many of them.
Right. So I'll provide like a slightly longer answer. So being a CISO, there's a lot of responsibility, right? So if you split up the whole landscape into 3 different pieces, one is the applications that are being developed. That is, let's say the developers constantly want to churn out products, they want to make modifications, they want to add new integrations so that as a new bank comes up, you're able to go and make a particular payment through this particular new bank. And the first set is about the applications and the products being developed. So that is something called product security. The second piece is around the infrastructure where all of this is hosted. So think of this as the cloud environment or the AWS environment. Especially we use AWS environment, right? And some of the traditional companies might use on-prem infrastructure where they have their own servers, they have their own VMs where they host these instances. And then the last part comes the endpoints, right? So these endpoints are the laptops that are being used to make the development, or mobile devices that are being used where you can check your email and Slack and Teams. So these 3 are the different verticals. So we want to kind of secure all these 3 verticals to ensure that the company is completely secure, right? So taking the application security side, so this is where there is a keyword called SDLC or SSDLC that is being used, where there's a lot of defense in depth that is like a constant term that you might hear from the security world. So that is being done, and so a lot of automation is in place so that as soon as a developer develops something, bugs get created if something is not secure, right? So that's the place that we have kind of reached over time. And then there is infrastructure where everything is secure by default. That means anything that is kind of insecure will automatically get blocked. And if anybody is trying to do something, for example, you might have seen that there's a lot of, you might have read in the newspapers that there's a lot of data leak of particular companies. This is mostly because, there is something called S3 buckets, which is a place where you can store a lot of information. So think of it as a shared drive that you might have heard of. So this might have become public accidentally. So we do have tools and automation running to ensure that this does not happen. And the last part is endpoint, right? So this I'm pretty sure everybody might have heard. There are antiviruses, and also we have something called EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, where these tools run to ensure there's no malware being downloaded, and also it's kind of cut off from the rest of the world where only legitimate websites are allowed, only the internal websites are allowed, and not all websites are allowed, right? So for example, if you go to a bank and if you ask them to open a particular website, they might not be able to open it. The reason being, this is highly restricted, right? And they might not be able to print all the stuff also. So yeah, that's basically like the endpoint security, where there are multiple layers of hardening where not all the functionalities are provided. So for example, if you go to a bank and if you ask them to take a printout by giving them a USB stick, even if they want to plug in the USB stick, it will not work because multiple such functionalities are blocked. That's the endpoint response part of it.
Thank you, Ashwath, and this was very interesting. Now, Ashwath, we have all heard about the Data Protection Act, and this is affecting the entire IT industry in a big way. How does it impact things which a CISO should be aware of?
Right.
And what are the things you guys are doing about it? Yeah.
Right. So the Data Protection Act or the DPDP Act, right? I think it's, from a personal opinion, I think it's a very good move because a lot of the other geographies already have it. So for example, in the EU, they have this strict GDPR Act, right? And if I have to break it down in simple terms, the DPDP Act states 4 things. One is when you collect somebody's information, just make sure that you are notifying the person that you are collecting the information. So how many of you have, whenever you visit a website, how many of you have seen a pop-up that shows up saying accept cookies or accept this one, right? A lot of you might have seen this particular thing, right? So this is basically saying, taking your consent, saying, hey, I'm going to collect information about you. Can I collect it or no? right? So the reason why they collect this information is to make it rich. So for example, let's say you go and visit a particular video on YouTube, the next 10 videos or the recommendations show up similar to whatever you have watched, right? So they do all of that background work using tracking website or trackers called cookies. Right. So that is the first piece of DPD Act, where you take the consent of users before you collect it. And the second part is, how do you store the data, and are you adding enough preventions when you store the data, or are you taking enough safeguards when you store the data, right? So this is where, are you encrypting the data, where do you store the PII, and make sure you don't send it to intentionally or unintentionally to third parties, for example, where with analytics websites and with trackers and so on, so that you don't share the data outside. And then the third part comes in, wherever you might face some kind of an attack, you are supposed to let the user know. So for example, let's say there's been a compromise in a particular website and your data has been leaked, you're supposed to notify the individual saying that this particular data piece or data blob has been leaked. And finally, the last step is ensuring that even in the analytics pipeline, this particular data is kind of stored the way it's supposed to be stored. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, and thank you for that. Now, let's move on to the industry which you represent, the fintech industry. And I think integrating security in something where finance is concerned, because of utmost importance, and we are all very, very sensitive about our money. So how do you integrate security and fintech into the products which you deal with?
Right. So it always worries me and it keeps me awake at night, especially knowing that we are dealing with people's money, right? And since wherever there is money movement involved, we have to be super secure and super sensitive. So whenever you go to a bank, before I joined Razorpay, I used to work at Synopsys and Microsoft before that, right? At Synopsys, I did a bunch of consulting with a couple of the large banks based out of Mumbai. And getting in there was always a pain, right? I'm sure you must have experienced that also. And they ask you for multiple things, right? Okay, at multiple checkpoints, show me your ID, show me the laptop, does the serial number match the actual serial number inside the laptop, and so on. It's like, okay, why are these guys complicating life so much? But now that I've joined Razorpay, I kind of appreciate the things that they were doing and all of the policies and the safeguards they had in place. The main reason being, I can see a couple of smiles where people must have experienced this pain, right? Where even opening like a simple email, let's say I have to send a document from my Gmail to like a person sitting in front of me. I know that they can see the document on my phone, but I can't send the document over to them. The reason being, they can't accept attachments, or they can't accept emails from outside. So they tell you, hey, go to a printer outside and go get a printout of your Aadhaar card. I can tell them, hey, see it, it's on my phone. Can I just email it to you? They will say, no, I cannot get an email, right? And the reason why all of these safeguards are in place is because, the companies don't want malware to get onto the bank network, through which, multiple other attacks could happen. So taking a step back and going back to your original question on the fintech, right? So it goes back to what I said previously, where defense in depth is very, very important. So going back to my Microsoft days, there's a common keyword that was used, which is assume breach, where you have to always assume that you're breached and then start adding controls in place, right? So think of it this way, right? So let's say you're trying to build a safe inside your house. So the first thing you do is you put a lock on the gate. You have a secure gate, you put a lock on the gate. Then you have a main door. Sometimes you put a steel gate around the main door. You lock that using a big lock. Then you lock the main door. Then you have a bedroom and you lock the bedroom door and you have a lock on it. Then you go to the final safe, or the bureau, like we call it, right? Like back in the days, the almirah. So you have a lock on the almirah inside and also on the outside, right? So think of this as the layers of depth that you need to have, especially when there is money movement involved. And for most of the core assets, we have all of these principles in place. So think of it as like 7 or 8 different layers before somebody can get to the actual piece. And that's where we kind of have all of these safeguards in place. And just one last example that I would like to use, that most of you might have experienced, right? So if you or somebody in your family, especially my wife or my mother, if they've kept some jewelry in the locker, so you need to go inside, you need to show your ID card, then you need to make a signature, then you need to go in with your key, the bank manager will come in with their key, they'll both rotate it together, that's when the locker will open, right? So think of the number of guardrails that they have in place before somebody can get to the locker. So those are the concepts, or those are the thought processes that go into play whenever we design our software or put our software out.
Yeah. So Ashwath, and we are moving sequentially from, so we have reached fintech now. Now, any discussion about technology is not complete with in the absence of AI. We have to speak about AI.
Right.
So I'm sure AI is both a bane and a boon. It would be bane in some ways and boon in some other ways. So what do you think the role of AI is in your industry, and how do you think you are prepared for it?
Right. So especially for the developers, how many of you have used Copilot, GitHub Copilot? So I can see a couple of hands, right? So GitHub Copilot is this version released by Microsoft on Visual Studio, where you can just add this particular plugin, and the claim on the website is, it improves your productivity by 30 or 40%, right? So there are public studies from some of the startups like Swiggy, where it has improved their performance by or the code productivity by about 40%. And the reason for this is, I have used it personally and I'm a power user of Copilot, is you can, so back in the day, if you think about programming, right? So you write some piece of code, you get some question, then you go back to and ask Google a question, then Google will find an answer, then you go to Stack Overflow, copy the code from there, come back here, paste it. So this whole life cycle involves like 3 or 4 context switches, and also it takes about 10 minutes for somebody to go copy the code, paste it here and see if it builds or no. Whereas here, the thing that you do is you just put a comment saying function to go fetch API from a particular website, modify JSON to a CSV, and then pass it back, right? So, and it prints out the code very neatly. So think of it as having a very smart assistant right next to you who does like the heavy lifting. And it has definitely improved my coding performance by at least 40 to 50%, right? The pace at which I can get things going. And it's definitely been like a great help. But at the same time, we have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that, hey, some of these servers might not be in India. And because of the data localization law, we have to store all of the data in India. And that's where, we have done some pretty smart things, right? We have said, okay, for the data that is present, ignore all of those files on Copilot, right? So we worked with the GitHub team to say, hey, can you enable this for us? And, they have enabled it for us. And these are some of the things that we have done, especially in like the productivity space. But there are a few other areas. For example, let's talk about OpenAI, right? So OpenAI has 2 different deployment models. One is, the public OpenAI, which is a ChatGPT. So anybody can go and sign in for ChatGPT. You can get an API key, and then you can start using that particular API key to make API requests, right? So that does not stay within your context. So it goes to the public context. What do I mean by public context? They could use your queries or your data to enhance their model. But they have another model called the private SaaS, which is, think of it as a sandbox or a container just for that particular company. So in our scenario, it's just for Razorpay, where the data resides in India, and all of the parameters and the tuning also happens specific to the particular company, not for all of the other companies to consume. And this is, become a very popular model that, most of us are using. And then there is the last model, which is public models, mostly like on Hugging Face and a bunch of other companies, where you take the model, you have your own infrastructure, you fine tune the model so that you can use it there. That would be ideal for any of the sensitive operations. The middle one is for, mostly like any of the private users. And then there is a last one, which is mostly, or the first one, which is mostly for like public usage. Let's say I want to find out more about how to write Python code and so on. So that is where the first one is used. Private SaaS is used for most of the use cases which are non-sensitive in nature. And for sensitive in nature, we go with the public models hosted in our infrastructure.
Yeah, awesome. So Ashwath, we are coming towards the end of this session. So, let's talk about startups a bit. So startups are organizations who, unlike big enterprise and enterprises who have been around for decades, they are different. And one of the key differentiating factor is the speed at which they want to grow. And in that hurry, how security is one thing which is easy to overlook. So how do you structure security for a startup? What do you do?
Right. No, excellent question, Chandan. And this is a question that's close to my heart as well, because I do have a lot of friends who run their own startups. So the first question they ask me is, hey, I'm trying to build a company. Like, don't come and give me like a 10-point checklist which will take me 1 year to develop, because I don't know if I will exist in 1 month, right? So that's the pace that they're running with. And you cannot go tell them to go build defense in depth or go do whatever Microsoft or what Razorpay is doing today, right? So in those scenarios, what can be done is like pick the P0s, right? Like what is the most important business risk? So for example, one, availability might not be your biggest risk, but at the same time, if somebody steals your IP of a startup, you're dead, right? So that's where you want to concentrate a lot of your effort on. And also, what is the next business risk? Making sure that you don't, if somebody is being your customer, don't make them feel bad, right? Don't expose all their data to the public. So that's where, focus on the infrastructure. And the last piece is to see if you can do some basic sanity checks on the application themselves. So starting from the top, make sure that their IP does not get stolen. Number two is make sure, the infrastructure is at least, it has some basic level of checks. And then the last piece is see if you can work on some of the applications, security, right?
Let's talk a little bit more in detail on startups. Now, startups, the second thing which differentiates startups from a regular big company is the need to innovate, and innovation is very closely related to openness. Security is, of course, far away from openness. It is about being closed, still available. So balancing these both ends would be a tricky proposition. Right. How do you do it? How do you advise?
Right. So so there is, one of the core cultures of Razorpay has been, so I'm just going to use the Razorpay's example, right? Has been transparency within the employees, right? So we use Slack, and most of the, communication happens on open channels. So the reason for that is, a lot of people learn a lot of things just by going through open channels, and especially, where the technical specifications, the concept notes, if you go through it, you understand more on products, how they're building it, the thought process and other things. But at the same time, security also comes into play, like don't go upload customer data or don't go upload, like sensitive information on open channels, right? So that's where, we use a lot of automated tooling. For example, the minute somebody uploads something, it gets scanned first, and then it gets uploaded, right? So that's where having automated controls come in really handy. And like I would like to use an example here, right, about openness. So how many of you have, this is a slightly older story. So I was at Microsoft and I've seen what happened internally back in 2014. So there was a movie called, I think 2014, there was a movie called Dictator, based on the North Korean dictator, that was released. And how many of you have heard the story? Yeah, I think a few hands went up. So this is where, they said if any theaters release it, then we will launch like a cyber attack on those particular theaters. And most of the theaters in the US did not release it. There were only 2 companies that came forward and said, hey, we will not back down by the attackers, and we will go ahead and release it, right? Because we want to stand up to bullies. And I'm very proud to say Microsoft was one such company, and Sony was the other company. And they launched a massive scale DDoS attack at that particular time. A lot of the information is public, so you can go read about it. And what happened was, from the internals, it was very, very difficult, and it was a catch-up game. And this is where the openness inside the security industry also came into play. So think of it as three wings working together. There was Microsoft, there was Sony, and also the FBI in the US. All three orgs were working together to kind of work on the controls and to work on how exactly to kind of mitigate against these attacks. So sorry, I diverted a little bit, Chandan, but back to your question on openness versus security. It's good to have the openness as long as we are secure, right? So if you think about, if you draw parallels with the influencers today on Instagram, they come and show, here is how much money I have, see all of the money I have, and here is where I store it, right? So the robbers have their address, they know where the money is stored, so you're giving them indications on how exactly to get to what it is, so they know how to enter. They might have seen the passcode also, through when you're wearing sunglasses and all of those things, right? So you want to be open, but at the same time not too open that you open up all the doors to your safes.
Awesome. So Ashwath, will move on. This is really a rapid fire. So Ashwath, I noticed that you have worked in the US for quite some time, close to a decade, and then you have moved on to India, and you have worked with Microsoft, I believe, there, and here Razorpay. There would be, in this cybersecurity ecosystem, or let's say the security ecosystem, there would be some differences from in these geographies, and it would be valuable for me and the audience to get a flavor of that. So
right. So I think a decade ago, this was the common term that I heard was Europe was 3 years behind the US. India and the rest of Asia was about 10 years behind the US in terms of security, right? So this was a common saying that I heard. But a lot has changed in the past 10 years thanks to a lot of the innovation by the startups. So today I must say, when I talk to a couple of my peers back in the US and in Europe, we are pretty much, on par with, on both in terms of tech and in terms of, security, right? Which is a natural progression because of the amount of tech we have built and the amount of intelligence that we have gotten, right? The data that we have gotten, we are almost on par, if not already, matching up to or getting ahead of the US, right? So a very good indicator of this is if you look at some of the technical conferences in the US, you'll see a large participation from India. So Black Hat, which is the largest security conference in the world, so I used to go there from like 2012 to 2015 every year, and I took like an 8-year hiatus, and I went this year or the previous year, 2023. I could hardly find maybe about like 5% Indians back in 2014-15, but this year it was close to like 30% Indians, right? So, and people who are speaking at the conferences, that shows the amount of technical depth that we have gotten, not just in terms of security but in terms of other tech as well. And the one thing that I hear is having worked with multiple vendors in terms of data or AI, companies like Razorpay, we always test their boundaries and we always stress test the companies. So that shows the volume that we have.
And that brings us to the last question we have. And so security threats and the challenges in the ecosystems are constantly evolving. Ashwath and our teams and us as well need to keep learning. How does one implement that in a company and for ourselves as well? How do you strive to be on the journey all the time?
Right. So one piece of advice that I would like to give everybody here is, on all your accounts, please go turn on 2FA, like two-factor authentication. It could be as simple as SMS, but just take a moment. On the banks, most of the banks enforce it. Please go enable it on every single place. Like that's the basic thing you can do. Having a complex password is good, but also remembering it might be a challenge. But the MFA piece, the two-factor authentication where you have like an SMS or an authenticator app, please go enable it everywhere, right? And the same stands good for us as enterprises also, like on all our infrastructure and on all our endpoints, we have 2FA enabled, that's the basic level of security and safeguards that it provides against most of the attackers.
I'm going to now open up this for questions. So can somebody pass on the mic, please?
Firstly, Chandan, very intelligent and very good questions. And Ashwath, I must thank you. Now, the expo is based on Convergence Expo. And the question is more related to day-to-day activities of Vision. So you mentioned application layer, infrastructure, and endpoint. Okay. These are the 3 layers for ensuring better security. And the most important thing is nothing can be more sensitive to a person than his personal money, right? So today you go to any stall, the first thing he's asking you is scan my QR code.
Right.
And most of the time the guideline is don't scan it. So we are having 2 divergent things. So how do you balance it out? Like today, I'm refusing to scan a QR code. I'm appearing like a person who is out of the present day reality.
Right. So, just taking a step back, right? Let me abstract, what exactly a QR code means. So QR code is, it's a shortcut to basically ask you to open a website, right? So instead of keying and typing the whole website or the URL link, it says, okay, just scan the QR code. And the QR code can be used for multiple reasons. One is you can open a particular website. So for example, you might have seen some of the clothes that you might buy or some of the items that you might buy. It will say for authenticity, just go scan this QR code. It will tell you whether it's authentic or not, right? So that would be like one particular piece. Or if people want you to bring you to their website, scan the QR code. It will take you to the website, and it will either open the home page or it will download like a PDF. And the last piece, which is where it gets a little bit scary, is 2 parts to this scary part. One part is it will ask you to download an app, and sometimes the app might not be listed on the App Store or the Play Store. So तब लोग बोलेंगे कि ठीक है सर, ये कर दो, ये unknown authors का ये कर दो, ताकि वो app download हो जाएगा. That is the red flag. So that is problem number 1. And problem number 2 is whenever you want to transfer money, right? So there is a QR code that's built in where you click on this, it will give you like the UPI ID. So that is the second area where you could accidentally send money to other people. That is the other part of the fraud. Like, inside this, there is also one more part where you might have scanned QR codes where it will tell you which user to send it to and also the amount that, you need to send. Let's say send 100 rupees to this particular user. So basically, long story short, QR code is just a big long URL, and the things that are enforced here are the amount and the person to send it to. So short answer to your question is, better to be safe than sorry. So you can ask them for like a manual link or ask them to send it to your email so that you can open it from the computer.
Just continuing with this, QR code was one example. But just one month back, there was this complete India Today issue on the scams because of this fintech comfortability or the ease of use. So with your expertise, how do I protect myself? And we are reaching out to more and more people on this particular issue. How do I protect myself on this?
Right. So scams happen whenever, so if I were to, switch my individual personality to like an attacker, right? So scams happen whenever there is 1, a weakness, and 2 is a lot of people are present there so that they can extract the maximum money, right? So one is, whenever there is a weakness, companies try to do the maximum, like coming from a fintech, right? We try to do the maximum safeguards to say, hey, go change your password or go do this particular thing, and put in the safeguards. But from a person perspective, you will have to ensure that do enable 2FA, and before transferring the money, do make sure that it's from a particular known source rather than an unknown source, and better to be safe than sorry, right? So if something looks too good to be true, it's not true. And unfortunately, I have not read that article, so I can't comment on the exact details. But the one thing I can tell you, having spoken to a lot of my peers as well in the industry, we're doing everything possible to kind of, ensure that people's money is safe, or whenever somebody is trying to use our platform, it is kind of secure.
Thank you, Ashwath. Any more questions from the audience? I think we have a gentleman.
A very good morning.
Thank you.
Ashwath, the latest trend in the tech or for the any enterprises, like whether it is in fintech or otherwise, DPDP is going to be a headache for the future, right? So how Razorpay is preparing for that, and what do you see that what could be the challenge for an enterprise?
Right. So the first piece is that we have done is getting. So the very first thing that any company needs to do is, one is figure out where you're collecting the data from users, right? And just have, you know, the verbiage to ensure that you are mentioning that, okay, you know, you're taking the consent of the particular user. Step number 2, when it comes to the infrastructure, this is where we are working with a startup called Aurva, AURVA. One is you need to figure out where the data is, right? And what kind of data is present. Then you need to apply some particular treatment for each of the kind of data. So that is where, you know, we are working with the startup to kind of first figure out what is the inventory, where all it is stored, and are we applying the right controls or not. Then the last part is that is, you know, we already have an incident response team in play, where if something happens, then we have run books to kind of go figure out. One additional step we need to add is that we've already added is to ensure that whenever there is a data theft, we need to also inform that particular individual. So those are like the 3 steps at a high level, but there's a lot more detail into that. If required, I can chat with you offline.
Hi Ashwath.
Hi.
Thanks for all the inputs that you have provided. However, my question relates to wherein we speak about the security objectives, whether be it information security, they need to be aligned with the business objectives. So there's a lots of alignment talk, but how do we change the perspective as in that the investment towards information security is not a dead investment? And is that opinion changing, or what's the prevalent sentiment regarding that?
Right. So when I joined Razorpay, you know, our co-founder asked me a very simple question, right? But there was a lot of nuance to it. Like, how do I know I'm more secure today as compared to yesterday, and a month from now as compared to the previous month, right? So that's where we had to draw or create metrics. So Razorpay, like a lot of other fintechs, works on the OKR models. That's the objective and key result. He was like, give me a key result. I started arguing with him, saying security is a snowflake. He's like, no, it's not a snowflake. The meeting is over. Come back with a key result, right? So that's where we had to do a lot of digging to kind of figure out, okay, what is the key result, and how exactly do we make sure that we are progressing in the right direction. And over iterations, we have kind of figured out what the 4 different key metrics are, and I can chat with you offline on that. And you know, month on month or quarter over quarter, we have a meeting where we kind of demonstrate the 4 key metrics, and every time an acquisition happens, you know, we onboard them on these metrics and we show forward progress. So that's basically, you know, the way we are, you know, 1, showing that we are making progress, and 2 is, you know, that the investment is not going for a waste. So it's not like, okay, just taking money and throwing it down the drain. Because, you know, very valid question. A lot of my peers also face this question that, hey, you asked me to buy this $100,000 tool, but, you know, what is the outcome, right? So it's a big question mark. But now, you know, we thankfully have some answers. It might not be 100%, but 80% of the questions will get answered.
Thank you. So I think we are.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ashwath, and it has been a great, you know, audience as well. Very interesting questions. Thank you for the participation.